I heard my wife say, no obligations satisfy you. So I accepted her terms, ended our marriage, and walked away with my own self-respect and peace. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the sun had barely gone down, but the air in the kitchen felt heavy, like someone had left the fridge open and all the cold seeped into my bones. Laura, my wife of 8 years, sat across from me scrolling endlessly through her phone, her fork paused midair, not even pretending to eat anymore, just picking at the salad like she was picking at my patience. I had been talking about my day, about the stupid work emails that piled up and the project that had blown past every deadline, hoping for the smallest sign of interest, maybe a smile, maybe a laugh, maybe even a nod, anything that said I mattered, but all I got was her eyes flicking up from the screen, sharp, detached, like I was some kind of background fixture in her life, a chair she forgot to put back. And then she said it, words that would echo in my mind for months, each one a hammer striking through the foundation of everything I thought we were. You know what? I'm tired of you expecting things from me all the time. You have no right to expect my care, my attention, my energy, my desire to make you happy. I have no obligation to satisfy you. The fork clattered to the plate as my hand froze mid-reach, my mouth half open in disbelief. The way you stop breathing for a fraction of a second when you see a car about to hit you. What, I asked slowly, confused, stunned, are you talking about? And she leaned back, eyes cold, and explained, as if giving a lecture rather than discussing a marriage. This whole thing where you think I should care about your day, listen to your problems, be invested in your life. The way you look at me like I owe you something. There are no obligations here. Not emotional, not physical, not anything. I sat there, chewing on silence, realizing that 8 years of shared meals, late-night talks, weekend projects, and mutual compromise had evaporated with a few sentences. And in that instant, something inside me shifted. If she had no obligation to me, then logically, I had no obligation to her. Not a shred, not a gesture, not even the pretense of caring. I finished my bite, swallowed hard, and said calmly, interesting, a slight edge in my voice noted her raised eyebrow, pleased with herself. I am glad you understand, she said, her voice sharp and crisp. I nodded, sipping water, feeling an unfamiliar sense of clarity and cold purpose. That night, as she settled into her usual spot on the couch with her phone, I packed a small bag, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. I discovered myself, too. I went to bed that night in a hotel room down the street, feeling a lightness I hadn't known in years, breathing free without the weight of someone's disregard on my chest. When Laura's frantic voicemail started, barely an hour before her return flight from a business trip, she claimed was for self-discovery, but smelled more like a getaway. I let them ring. The next morning, she walked into our house to find me gone, our bed empty, the apartment quiet except for the note she found on the counter. I discovered myself, too. It read, simple, clean, undeniable. Her voice on the phone was frantic, trembling, pleading, and I listened, detached but aware, letting her flounder in the mess she had created. She asked where I was, if I was serious, if this was a joke. I told her nothing but that I had accepted the rules she gave me. No obligation to satisfy, remember? She stammered, tried to twist her words, tried to convince me this was an overreaction, but I knew something that she had forgotten. Clarity is terrifying when it is applied evenly. She wanted freedom from obligation while keeping all the perks of a partner who cared, and she hadn't considered that freedom doesn't discriminate. I spent the first few days in solitude, walking through the city streets, feeling the early winter chill on my face, thinking about every dinner she ignored, every conversation she shut down. Every night, I slept alone while she scrolled through her phone, as if we were roommates instead of a marriage. And slowly, piece by piece, I realized the depth of my own endurance, the reservoir of patience and self-respect I had buried beneath years of accommodating someone who wouldn't meet me halfway. I started reclaiming routines that had been hers by default. Coffee in the morning? I made mine. Not for her, not for us, just for me. I refused to answer calls about errands, about household tasks she used to dump in my lap. When she tried to start conversations, I responded minimally, politely, neutrally. Her confusion became palpable. She called. She texted. She showed up at the places I frequented, all attempt to pull me back into a dynamic I had already left behind. I didn't respond except when necessary, and even then I spoke like a neutral party, not a husband invested in making someone else comfortable. Weeks passed, and the shift became chemical, almost irreversible. I realized that my self-respect wasn't just restored. It was growing in ways I hadn't anticipated. I could live without her emotional demands, without her dismissive laughter, without her disdain masquerading as honesty. She tried to manipulate, first with apologies, then with attempts at generosity. Cooking meals I no longer shared, buying things I no longer accepted, trying to resurrect intimacy she had abandoned emotionally years before. And every time, I treated her exactly as she had treated me, with the detachment, the precision, the logical consistency of her own declarations. She grew desperate. She tried reasoning, tears, even subtle attempts at guilt, and I met them with clarity. If she wanted partnership, she needed to demonstrate fully, not selectively, not on her own terms. The breakthrough, if you could call it that, came one rainy afternoon when she sat across from me, head bowed, admitting, finally, that she had been selfish, that she had taken me for granted, that she had built a world in which she kept the benefits without the responsibility. I didn't respond immediately, just watched, realizing that this honesty was rare, raw, and necessary. She asked if we could fix it, if we could rebuild, and I told her that we could, but only with conditions. Transparency, mutual care, respect, and accountability, not convenience. She nodded, tears streaking her face, and I saw the first genuine reflection of shame and comprehension in months. Over the next 6 months, the rebuilding was painstaking. She asked questions, listened, cooked, and even attempted emotional labor, but not automatically, not instinctively. She had to think, to calculate, to choose to participate. And yet, slowly, I saw glimpses of real empathy, moments where she acted without expecting recognition, without seeing the act as currency for her peace of mind. By the 9th month, we were different. I was different. I understood boundaries, self-respect, and the clarity that comes when someone shows you your worth by denying your mistreatment. She was different too, learning to care because she wanted to, not because she was obliged to, and slowly discovering that obligation in love is not a cage, it's a framework for connection. Our marriage was no longer the default complacency it had been, no longer the emotional extraction chamber where my effort went unnoticed. It was a partnership rebuilt from the ground up, forged in the fire of honesty, consequence, and mutual respect. And I learned something that day, and I carry it every morning I wake up, every conversation I have, every relationship I choose to enter or exit. Self-respect is not a negotiation. Peace is not granted. They are discovered when you refuse to participate in someone else's refusal to honor you. And sometimes you walk away not in anger, not in spite, but in serene clarity, leaving behind the illusion of love to find the substance of it within yourself, and eventually, perhaps, in someone who is capable of choosing it back to you. Life after that revelation wasn't suddenly perfect, though. It was more nuanced, more textured, the kind of slow burn you don't notice until one morning you wake up and realize the air in the house feels different, lighter but not empty. Laura and I had started negotiating our days with new honesty. Chores weren't assumed. Conversations weren't obligatory. Intimacy wasn't a given, but when it happened, it was chosen. There were still mornings where I caught her staring out the window, the expression on her face soft, reflective, and I wondered if she was still recalculating her world, trying to find the version of herself that had existed before she became defensive, self-protective, indifferent. There were arguments, too, subtle ones at first, over groceries or who would drive the kids to soccer, but even the fights had a different weight. They weren't about neglect anymore. They were about negotiating space, attention, respect, and the tension always ended with acknowledgement rather than resentment. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since college, chronicling these small victories and the moments of quiet understanding. Sometimes I wrote about the nights when I felt loneliness creeping in, the nights I doubted if giving Laura another chance was wise. Sometimes I wrote about the exhilaration of rediscovering my own rhythms, taking walks without her judgment, making dinner for myself because I wanted to, reading books she had never touched, sleeping on one side of the bed and feeling a home there. She noticed the changes too. At first, she watched me, almost like a scientist observing a specimen, tentatively testing her conclusions. Then gradually she started participating, offering small gestures of thoughtfulness, a cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning, a note tucked into my laptop bag, a spontaneous smile that wasn't calculated but just there. And I felt the oddest mix of pride and relief. Pride that I had weathered the storm of her disregard without losing myself. Relief that she was starting to understand what mutual respect looked like. But life being life, nothing stayed static. There were moments when I felt her slipping back into old patterns. The distracted conversations, the half-smiles, the sighs that sounded like impatience. And I had to remind myself, sometimes out loud, sometimes just in my mind, that this rebuilding was ongoing, not a miracle. There were evenings when I'd catch her lingering on her phone a bit too long, or when she'd respond to a question with something clipped and cold. I'd feel the old itch of resentment, the small pull of past wounds, but I realized something important. Noticing it didn't mean reacting. I had learned that. I had learned to step back, breathe, and measure the moment before deciding if it deserved a response. Those evenings became our silent training grounds. Without drama, without confrontation, we each learned to notice and adjust, to acknowledge faults without weaponizing them, to choose empathy over reflexive defensiveness. And slowly, very slowly, we began to create a rhythm that felt human, imperfect, yet alive. There were still nights when Laura would look at me and I could see a flicker of guilt, maybe shame, the awareness that she had once taken so much for granted. And there were nights when I felt the thrill of my own autonomy, the fact that I had survived her cold dismissal and emerged intact, stronger than before. Over the next year, the children began to notice the difference too. They didn't understand the intricacies, of course, but they felt the change. Family dinners became spaces where laughter edged in between sentences rather than awkward silences, where my words were heard because they had been chosen, not expected, where Laura's attention, when present, carried weight. Slowly, intimacy began to return, not automatically, not mechanically, but as a genuine response to connection. Our kisses became deliberate, our touches meaningful, not habitual. It was a strange, beautiful learning curve, where each act of closeness was an earned acknowledgement of effort and respect. Yet even as we settled into this new balance, life threw new challenges at us. Laura's job became more demanding, requiring late nights, travel, and long weekends away. I faced a promotion at work that demanded more of my focus and energy. And in those moments, the old temptations rose, to slip back into old resentments, to demand attention, to react as I once had, to test boundaries out of frustration. But each time, I stopped, reminded myself how far I'd come. The lessons of that first night, when she declared a lack of obligation, were etched in me like tattoos. Clarity, boundary, self-respect, peace. Whenever I felt myself sliding, I thought of that note of my calm departure, of the lightness I felt walking away from what wasn't serving me. And I remembered that peace wasn't just about being left alone. It was about choosing who and what deserved my energy. Laura, in turn, began showing a consistent evolution. She started volunteering at a local shelter, engaging in acts of care that had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with performance. And I watched her grow into someone who could give without expecting return. I watched her transformation with a mix of relief and cautious optimism, knowing that self-respect in one person can only be mirrored by responsibility in the other if both are committed. And through all of it, I documented my own journey, not as a ledger of grudges or grievances, but as a diary of discovery, a record of emotional growth, of hard-earned patience, of learning that love without clarity is empty and that clarity without love is cold. Our relationship, once teetering on collapse, became a living experiment in conscious connection, imperfect, often messy, but entirely real. And in the quiet moments when the house was still, when Laura was asleep or reading on the porch, I would reflect and realize that walking away that first night, with nothing but self-respect and clarity, had been the single most transformative act of my life. Not revenge, not confrontation, not manipulation, just refusal to accept what was unacceptable. And slowly, steadily, life began to honor that choice, giving back to me the respect, the love, and the peace I claimed. I learned that freedom in marriage isn't about absence. It's about honest presence. It isn't about obligation, it's about choice. And sometimes it takes losing a version of a relationship entirely to rebuild one worth living in. And even now, years later, I can still feel that moment, that Tuesday evening, the fork clattering, the words echoing in my ears, and I smile quietly to myself, knowing that peace, once found, is a force that reshapes everything in its path.